Hi, I'm Matt and welcome back to my workshop. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Record Power PT260 planer thicknesser. This is my Record Power PT260 planer thicknesser. It has a 260mm wide planing bed and 160mm thicknessing capacity. This, when I bought it new 3 years ago, was about £650 from D&M Tools in Twickenham. And the next models up, the sort of single unit floor standing models, were about £1,000 back then. Now, they're still about £1,000 and they're available from Axminster, Charnwood, Record Power, Lumberjack and Scott Sargent with the iTech range. However, this model is now about £800 or just over in some places. And the price plays a very important factor in whether or not I think this machine is worth it. Now we'll cover that later on in the review. However, for now, let's get up close and personal with the machine. So, starting on top of the machine and looking at the fence. This fence is an aluminium extrusion that's 20mm thick and 61.5 centimetres from end to end, so from here down to here. The fence is adjustable. There's some cam levers back here, and if I pull this off and turn this around, so this cam lever here locks into a groove here, and there are two rollers on here that locate in these channels here, and that's what keeps it locked down to the table. And then in addition to that, there's this cam lever here which you loosen to change the angle of the fence. And with this, I don't know if you can see here, but there's some lock bolts there and here, and these are what act as your stops. So the fence, once it's in position and you've set it to the right angle, it is absolutely rock solid and it won't move. So once you remove the fence and replace it like I just did there, you do need to check that it's square again, because although the design that is used for locating the fence is an old and tested design, it works but only to a certain level of accuracy. On much more expensive machines they have much better systems for doing it. So once you've replaced it and locked it down, just put a square up against it and you look up and down the length of the square to make sure that it is actually square to the table. And in this instance it's relocated exactly square, but it doesn't always. Secondly, the angle adjustment is really finicky and difficult to use. When you loosen the fence off, it tends to bind and it's really hard to set and maintain an angle even with the stops there. And I will try and demonstrate this now. First of all, if you try and adjust the angle locking lever first, you will run into problems with it colliding with the fence locating locking lever. So you need to loosen that off initially and move it back out of the way as much as possible while still keeping it engaged. You then loosen this off and instantly the fence drops down, which you don't want. So you need to lift it back up and then tilt it to 45 degrees. And as you tilt it, everything tightens up again, which makes it really hard to do. Take it down, tighten it up and check your angle. Now that's close enough. Still, if I needed a precision 45, there's no way that I'd trust this. And then to get it back, again, loosen the locking handle, lift it up, get it reasonably square and start to tighten it up. And unfortunately, this is the same every time I move this fence. It's not as bad if you sort of remove the fence and replace it, but if you change the angle on this, then you're going to struggle. Now it's square again. So as you can see, the design of the fence is, well, ropey at best. However, once it's in position, it is rock solid, and if I don't move this now, I won't need to check this at all, ever. It just stays where it is once it's locked in position. It's just that getting it in position is a bit of a pain. Moving on to the planing beds. These planing beds are cast aluminium and they're generally fairly robust and relatively stable. Now at the back end of the mounting block here, just here, at the ends of these levers, there's a grub screw on each side which you can turn in and out independently of each other to either raise or lower the table or raise or lower one side of it. If I take this table off, where these grub screws are here, just in front, there's these two mounting bolts onto this plate here. So if you loosen these bolts, you can slide the table forwards and backwards, and because it sits on this angled bed, when you slide it forwards here, it raises the front of the table. So there is plenty of adjustment on the outfeed table. And it locates fairly easily. Next, the infeed table. The only adjustment here really is the height adjustment. So there's some pins here, these are what connect this. The pins and the bolts are basically what locate and connect the table to the body of the machine. There aren't any adjustment screws here, so if this is out of kilter, you're pretty done really, because there isn't an easy way to adjust it. Remember, this has to be in line not only with the outfeed table but also the planer block itself. So if you take the planer block out of the equation, if this is out of kilter, you simply adjust the outfeed table to this table and everything will be fine. But you can't then adjust both of these to the planer block or the planer block to these. The only way to get around that is to adjust the planer knives rather than the planer block. And adjusting these planer knives is not a simple and straightforward process, but it is achievable. So even if your planing beds are slightly out, you can adjust the machine enough to get it all singing true, but it's not ideal, because obviously as soon as you adjust these knives out of square with the body, as soon as you start putting things through the thicknesser, you then run into other issues. So it would be nice to have some adjustment on the infeed table, but that is not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that these are made out of cast aluminium, and that comes with two issues. So if I just take the camera off the tripod for a minute, and will this focus here? So this here, this shiny bit, this isn't just where the coating of the planer bed has worn off. This is actually a slight hollow where, when I've been putting wood across, it's worn it down. So aluminium in the hierarchy of materials is not all that hard. And over time, you can get wear with stuff. You can actually feel a hollow there. And then, in addition to that, there's scratches in it. Now, admittedly, some of these deep scratches are from nails, hidden nails, from when I've been planing reclaimed boards, which I advise you don't do. I don't do it myself anymore. I generally just use sawn timber these days. But not all of it is. So if you look up here, a lot of the coating has worn off these teeth here, and the surface of the metal is a little bit rough. So that's one problem with aluminium, that it's quite soft. However, there is an even larger problem. And that is that over time, these tables have warped. I keep having to adjust the tables to account for it. And when I say that, I don't mean that the tables are like moving on their beds. I mean that if I adjust this and get it all perfectly flat and stuff like that, in 6 months I might have to adjust just one corner to take out some twist that's been imparted into it. And you might say, well, it's metal, how can that happen? Well, if I was using cast iron or something like that, it wouldn't. However, aluminium has a melting temperature of around 660 degrees, or about 933 degrees Kelvin. Now, creep and deformation in metals can occur at as little as 1/3 of the melting temperature. And with aluminium, that is about 311 degrees Kelvin. And when you transfer that back into Celsius, that's 38 degrees. So at 38 degrees, these can twist and warp. Now, in England, the temperature rarely gets that high, although it has once or twice in the last few years. But it's not just the ambient temperature. You've got the heat rising out of the machine that's soaking into these tables, and heat from the friction of the wood going across it. So at certain points on this table, getting individual spots to 38 degrees or above that isn't that difficult to do. So whilst it's good for what it's designed for, I wouldn't rely on it to give you a joinery ready flat face. So what I normally do with these is I will plane in thickness, and I've got to be honest, the thickness part is actually very good. That has a cast iron bed inside and it interacts with the cutter block, so once it's thicknessed it's generally very straight. However, because this can and has indeed warped in the past, and it's very easy to be slightly out of adjustment on this, you don't always get a truly flat face. So I always use a hand plane after I've done this, and I use this basically just to get it flat enough to run it through the thicknesser. So what I will generally do is I will pass a board over here and get it as flat as this will take it. I will then join an edge of it on this. Once I've done that, I'll then run it through the thicknesser, and once I've got rid of all of the saw marks in the thicknesser, I will flip the board back over and pass it back through the thicknesser with the plane side facing up, and that generally gets me almost there. But like I say, a lot of the times I still use a hand plane. I always use a hand plane on the edges. I don't always do it on the faces. Sometimes the faces are good enough. So that's the planing bed. As you can see here on the side, there's a little etch mark just there, and then these marks on this, what is effectively a sticker, and they tell you your planing depth. Now in the manual it says up to 3 millimeters planing capacity. I've done that in the past, and even with a dust extractor that extracts 1500 cubic meters an hour, which is a lot more than what this needs, apparently, the dust extractor still blocks up, and that's using 4-inch pipe. And the reason why that happens is because a lot of the woods that I use, like maple and beech and stuff like that, when you plane them that thick, rather than getting little fine chips, what actually happens is that you get big strings of wood coming off. Woods like walnut and oak, you can go to the 3 millimeters, though oak is very hard and I wouldn't recommend it. Generally speaking, I aim for about 1 millimeter at a time. So next on the list is the blade guard. Now this adjusts up and down, and using these 4 screws here you can effectively apply tension to this rod so that wherever you put it, it will stay there, or if you want it a bit looser you can set that. And then with this here, you just lift this up. This has a little cam that locates in this groove, and you can slide it in and out. It's not a particularly nice design and it feels cheap when you use it. Right, so to change this from planing mode to thicknessing mode, you obviously have to remove the fence. Now we've already done that. The next thing, you need to fully retract the guard, and you need to raise it up fully. Then use these 2 levers to take the table off. Put that to one side. Then flip over this shroud and you start winding this handle here. Now, clockwise lowers it, anti-clockwise raises it. So you want to lower that, and then you can pull out a dust hood. Put the dust hood on. This left-hand lever you slide over to lock it in place, and then slide the fence over and push that down. And that is it now ready to thickness. Now, it won't thickness unless this is flipped over like this. It has some micro switches that stop it from turning on without it. And likewise, it won't plane unless the dust hood is fitted underneath. It won't allow you to turn it on. So for thicknessing, you've got a scale here with a little arrow pointer. And this arrow pointer is adjustable just with this little screw, so you can plane a piece of stock down, measure it, and then set this accordingly, so you can tune it in very accurately. And to raise and lower the bed, you just turn this handle. Now, I would have preferred a wheel here rather than a handle, but for some reason it's just supplied with a handle. Well, the reason is that it's cheaper, obviously. Now, if I just take the camera off the tripod again and come down here, so the handle here attaches to the shank just with a bolt, and then there's a locking nut just here. And once that's done up, it generally stays there. And then the shaft is attached to the body with this screw here and a grub screw on top that locks it into place. However, both of these things have come loose in the past, and what I ended up having to do is use Loctite on the bolt here and Loctite on the threads of this screw, as well as using the grub screw to keep it in place. And the scale here is in millimetres, and you can see it actually goes down to 165 millimetres. So, focus. So these bolts and springs are what tension your in-feed and out-feed rollers. These are set from the factory, and I've had problems with these in the past as well, which I'll come on to in a second. Let me just put the camera back on the tripod. So in the manual it lists basic maintenance operations that you have to do every now and then. One is checking the belt tension, which is under the front cover here, and another is oiling the drive mechanisms, which are behind this cover back here. And they are easy and straightforward to do, they don't take much time. What isn't covered though is any other maintenance operations, and those tensioning bolts under there have come loose in the past. Now obviously you just wind them back into tension them, but it doesn't tell you anywhere in the manual how much tension they should be under. And it is literally just trial and error and listening to the machine until it sounds right again. When they're loose, it makes a horrible, horrible sound. It sounds like the machine is going to vibrate apart. And at the minute, I'm still trying to adjust them back to the right tension. But it takes time. So what we'll do now is I will show you the machine working. So here I'm face planing an offcut, and I normally always use push blocks, but in this case the offcut's a little bit too narrow, so I keep swapping between using the push blocks and using my hands to pass it through. At the minute I'm taking a 1mm depth of cut on this pass, and I take a ruler and measure the face to see if it's straight, and on the leading edge there's a small gap, so I need to make some more passes. I take the depth of cut from 1mm down to about a 0.5mm, as this reduces the amount of error across the length of the board, Now, I don't know why this happens, but when you take a deep cut, there can be quite a discrepancy along the length of the board between the middle and one end. And if you then reduce the depth of cut, the error reduces, and the error is generally about half of the depth of cut that you're taking at the time. So now that I've reduced the depth of cut to about a ½ millimetre, as I pass the wood over the planer, you can hear that it's skipping in some places where there's high and low spots, so I'll keep passing it through until I get one constant pass. And again, I check it for flatness, and this time it's more than flat enough. I then set up for edge planing, making sure that the blade guard applies plenty of pressure to the workpiece to keep it square to the fence. Again, I check this for flatness, and I do this before I check it for square, because it doesn't matter if it's square if it isn't flat. And once again I need to make a second pass. Now I've adjusted the depth of cut too much here, so I raise it back up, and you can see that it just takes material from the middle of the board. And this time when I check it for flatness, it's nice and flat, so I can then check it for square. And it's square along its entire length. Now I'm swapping it over to thickness in mode, and I've left this in unedited so you can see how long it takes and how much of a faff it is. The more expensive machines simply have the tables flip over, which is a lot quicker, and if you go for the next step up beyond that, the sort of £1200 to £1500 range of planer thicknesser, the tables flip as one piece with the fence still attached, so it's literally one action that you have to perform. And that's it, now ready for thicknessing. And as you can see, I've got it set to a depth of 25mm. And now I just check each corner to make sure that it is actually what the machine says, and that the thickness is even along the full length and across the full width of the board, which it is. Each corner measures 25mm precisely. So that's Record Power PT260, and for furniture size work it's absolutely brilliant. So this is the sort of typical leg length of a cabinet, and if I hold this ruler up there, it's almost perfectly flat. It's nothing that 1 or 2 passes with a hand plane wouldn't sort out. It's relatively smooth, could be improved on. The edge, where you sometimes get ripples, as long as you go slowly over the planer bed, then it gives you a nice joinery ready face for furniture grade stuff. Again, it could be improved upon with a hand plane, and actually if you're going to do edge jointing, then you want a spring joint, so you'd need to take a hand plane to it anyway. And that is again pretty close to flat. There's maybe a 1/4 millimetre at one end, but again, hand plane, 2 or 3 passes and that's gone. The adjoining face, sorry, the opposite face is exactly the same, and if I measure everywhere around it, that is bang on 25 millimetres thickness on both of those corners, and bang on 25 millimetres thickness on both of those corners. So earlier on you saw me passing things over the planer and then you saw me adjusting it. So initially I was taking 1 millimetre passes, and that gets it flat to within about probably 1/2 millimetre over the length. If you want to improve upon that, then you reduce the depth of cut, and the error is generally, I don't know why this is, but what I found is that the error is generally about half of the depth of cut that you're making. So if you're making a 3mm pass, you might have quite a large error, around 1 millimetre, 1.5 millimetres or something like that. But when you get close to your final surface, then reduce the depth of cut right down and just basically do what machinists call a spring pass, which is where you're taking virtually nothing off. It just evens everything out a little bit. So yes, the record power planer thicknesser, the PT260, works quite well for furniture size stuff. You generally wouldn't leave this as a finished face anyway. You would normally either sand this or use a hand plane just to refine it. But you know, it's good enough. Now, at the price that I paid for it, 650 quid, I think it's worth that. Absolutely. It's certainly a massive step up from the small benchtop ones that you get from Screwfix and the likes. The fence, although it's fiddly, once it's in place, it's rock solid. The planer beds are they're 1 metre and, let me just measure them. Okay, so the planing beds are 1 metre and 4 centimetres long, so they're a lot longer than what you'd get on the cheaper machines. And whilst the cast aluminium has warped and moved over time, it is easy to adjust out, and when it has warped, it's not as though it's turned into a banana. You know, it might have moved by, I don't know, 5 or 10 thousandths of an inch or something like that. So it can have a detrimental effect on the wood, but it's a very small amount, and it's the sort of difference that generally you wouldn't notice normally, and you would get rid of it with a few passes of a hand plane. Having said that, if you can get cast iron, get cast iron. It just is better, there's no question about it. Now, where this machine does struggle is with larger scale stuff. Like for instance, this workbench. Every single piece of timber that's used on this workbench was put over that planer thicknesser, and the bench top is 1.5 metres long, and the discrepancies in flatness there were not 1/2 millimetre. Once you get to these sort of scales, sometimes it was 2 and 3 millimetres difference between the middle and one end, and there was a lot of work involved with hand planing to get it down. So this scale of work is just too big for that machine. But as I keep saying, for furniture sized products, it's absolutely fine. Now, when it was 650 quid, I think it's totally worth it. Now that it's 800 quid and there's only 150 or 200 quid between that and the next step up, I would strongly suggest going for the next step up. Not only do you get slightly longer planing beds and a slightly larger thicknessing capacity, but you get cast iron tables, and that is really important, because all of the issues that I've had with this, or the majority of the issues rather, have come from the fact that it has aluminium beds. If you can afford the cast iron, go for it. If you can't afford the cast iron and you want to go for this, now don't get me wrong, it is still a very, very good machine. It just could be improved. So if you can't afford the cast iron and you want to go for something like this, look for a used one where you're paying, I don't know, £500 or £600 or something. And if you get one at that price, you're going to feel like you've got value for money. If you pay 800 quid for this machine, you're going to hate yourself for it, because it is just not worth that amount of money. Now, the Record Power stuff comes with a 5-year guarantee. Now, there's only one thing that I've had to replace on that, and that's the bolts that hold the blade housing in place. And when I talked to Record Power, they weren't going to replace them under guarantee. They were going to charge me for them, and they were going to charge £1 per bolt. Now, they're just high tensile steel M6 by 10 bolts. You can go down to Screwfix, which I did, and I got a box of 200 for I think £1.90 or something like that, and they were going to charge £1 a bolt, not under guarantee. So just bear that in mind. The guarantee is only useful if their after sales service is good, and I personally don't think that the after sales service from Record Power is that good. So I would probably look at something like the Charmwood 10x8 planer thicknesser. It may not be as refined as some of the other planer thicknessers. I think John McGrath did a very good review on it, but it's still a step up from this in that it has cast iron beds. And I've got a couple of Charmwood machines here, and I have spoken to Charmwood after sales service, and they are brilliant. Charmwood really do care about their customer experience. So that's my opinion of it. Yes, it's a good machine. At the price I paid or second hand, it's an excellent buy. Buying it new now, I wouldn't bother. I would either go for a step up or look for it second hand. Anyway, I hope you found this useful. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. If not, give it a thumbs down. Leave a comment, let me know what you like and what you don't like about these videos, because at the end of the day I want to grow this channel, and the only way that the videos are going to get better is by getting feedback from you. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.